Welcome back, Equity Warriors. Thanks for tuning in to this special episode. Get your notepads out and get ready. My guest today is Dr. Kareem Moncree-Moffett, and she has papers. She holds degrees in chemical engineering, technology, and natural sciences, a Master of Arts focused on remedial education in higher education, and a PhD in education. Her dissertation was on educating urban African-American youth, so you can probably already imagine why. I love speaking with this woman. She has served as an academic advisor at the Center for Access and Transition and a first-year experience professor at the University of Cincinnati. She was also a quantitative analysis math professor, let me get those words in the right order, at Cincinnati State Technical College. I can't say it, I can't imagine being in the class. Dr. Moncree-Moffett has worked as a chemist and a director of diversity programs and services. She consults on engagement strategies, diversity and awareness initiatives, and cultural inclusivity. During her time with Cincinnati Public Schools and in the higher education classroom, Dr. Moncree-Moffett learned the value that teachers and staff bring to students. She also learned effective ways to engage students, parents, and the community in the learning process. It was in the classroom that Kareem came to understand the challenges that teachers, administrators, parents, and our districts as a whole face regularly. She has been called a fierce disruptor for equity, students, and community connectivity. Doc, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I have to share that we met at the Ohio School Boards Association conference this past November, and you were kind enough to let me squeeze in at the bar when there were no seats to be found anywhere in that space. We started talking and we haven't stopped talking since. So I am both honored and thrilled to have you on my show.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, the honor is mine. Thank you.
Oh, so we have to start with Black girls in STEM. So I know I shared, I had math trauma. When I was a little girl in school, math was not my jam. I did okay, literally out of the sheer necessity. I knew I needed to have good grades so I could go to college. I knew I had to have that math, the math courses so I could go to college, but I called it quits after 1 week with Mr. Nadeau in high school trig. Now, some of that was high school trig. A lot of that was Mr. Nadeau. Clearly, your story was very different. So tell us about it.
I'm going to share. You hit it on the nose when you said, the teacher's name, the subject. You can probably almost feel being in the classroom again. That is the biggest deterrent for our students is the teacher. And I hate to say it, we've got some excellent teachers, but we also have some that can traumatize our students and make them feel as if this is just not for me. And particularly students of color, they need to understand that this is in you. This is something that is innate. And I tell by the time I get them on the collegiate level, they've been battered, they've been bruised, they are severely traumatized. And I'm almost always met with resistance. I can't do this. I don't do well in math. And I immediately say on the first day, let's change our word speak, because you engage with math every single day. When you walk or ride down the street and there's two lines in the middle of the street, I ask them, what are those? Those are parallel lines. Do they cross? No, you don't cross them. When you go up a hill, you're increasing in slope. When you go down a hill, that's decreased slope. When you go to the grocery store and you purchase something 10 for 10, that's a ratio. And when you start breaking things down, they really realize, wow, math is all around me. So the narrative that our kids don't do well in math and the narrative that women don't do well in math is simply just that propaganda. And once I start allowing them the space to see math all around them, and then I formalize it and say, let's just talk about it in the formal name. So formally, it's a ratio, but we just say 10 for 10. And when we start doing that, it's like, wow, I do engage with that. And then when they see themselves in the math every day, when they engage with it every day, then it releases some of the tension. And I'm going to tell you, one area that I've not met one person that messes up in math is regarding money. Everybody gets their money right. So I start breaking down how 75 cents is just 3 parts of a fraction of a dollar. And they're like, oh my gosh, I never thought about it like that. We always get intimidated by fractions. Well, you don't get intimidated by change. And I tell them, If you don't like the coins, give them to me because I'll take them. But those are just portions of a whole, which are fractions. And they're just like, wow. So I say that to say, it starts with teachers. It starts with the classroom. It starts, you can have amazing teachers, and you remember them, but you can also have the horrible ones and you remember them as well. So it just begins with that teacher. And I was never a math geek. I'm going to tell you, I was never a math geek. I just understand it in simplest terms, and I can share that knowledge with others. So that's just that's just been me.
Wow. Yeah, I think if I did not have that man in high school, I probably, not that I loved math, but it would not have been traumatizing. Because honestly, you talk about, you remember the ones that were terrible, you remember the ones that were great. Well, I had Mr. Huey, I had for 10th grade geometry, and I loved his class. He was funny, he was engaging, he was amazing. Now, I do always confess that I cut his class a lot because I was having a good time in high school too. I had straight A's. I knew I was fine. I aced his class. He made it understandable. So I didn't have to be there every single day, right? Oh, I get it. Concept day one, Monday, I'm fine. I'll be there Friday for the test. I had a good time in high school and in college. What can I say? But I think about our children, particularly our Black and brown kids, and especially given that most of the teachers that they're ever going to see are going to be white and primarily women. And, we're going to talk about DEI a little bit later. But what advice would you give to parents who are listening, parents of children of color, and particularly Black and brown children, and even more particularly our girls who often get pushed out? To those parents that are listening and their children are thinking about a STEM focused education or career, what would you say to them?
If they're thinking about a STEM focused career, then they're really further along than most, because most Black and brown students don't go into STEM because it's not introduced to them as an option. And it's unfortunate. And I have my own conspiracy theories, because I think they need to recognize that they come from STEM focused professions historically. So I think that there's a movement to make our children feel like they don't excel in those areas.
Can
But
I
if they,
can I get you to go down that road? Because I was thinking about this question. I thought, well, I didn't tell her I was going to ask it. I know when I do some research on Black history and the contributions that our ancestors made, calculus came from our motherland, right? Higher math originated on the African continent. Why is it that, well, I will go ahead and ask it the way I was thinking it. Why is it that our children are not given that history and told, miseducated, that calculus came from Europe?
Mhm. Well, I think that is systemic, and I don't want to go down too far down the rabbit hole, but I think that what I have seen, let me put it this way, that once we start educating our kids on just small little nuggets of history, the barter system, that was something that we taught Europeans. It Once we start really giving just small nuggets, it inspires them to want to know more, and so. I think if you can, if you dim someone's light early on, then you don't have to do anything. They don't even assume that the light is on. And I think that that's some of this too. If I tell Black and brown students that they don't excel in math and science, then they're not even going to want to pursue that as an option. And that is exactly what we're seeing, is that they don't go into teaching, they don't go into math, they don't go into science because they don't feel that they can excel there. And we have parents that are telling them, well, I know you don't do well in math. I know you no, that is not true. And I have struggled with that myself, because I have men that were boys at one time, and I was a chemist, and my kids would not come to me for help. And as a mom back then, we talked about what we would do differently. I would force some things that I didn't force as a parent. And part of that would be making sure that someone was consistently telling you your history, even if you didn't want to hear it. I was giving it to them. And then when I got the pushback, I kind of pushed back. I let go. But I would ensure that if it were me with young people now as a parent, I would make certain that they always hear that they can, always hear that they can. And they are challenged to think critically. And every parent can do this. It doesn't have to be a parent that has a college degree or even graduated from high school. It could be that parent that says, always ask the why. And when my students come into my classroom, I always greet them and I say, good morning, scholars, or good afternoon, scholars. And I had a student tell me one time, why do you always say that? We're just students. And I said, well, I want you to look up what a student is. I want you to look up what a scholar is. I want you to be a scholar. And that's the first step by asking that question. But it changes with that we get different results when we change as parents. And it doesn't have to be these grandiose PhD parents. It could be a regular parent that maybe didn't graduate high school but wants the best. Make sure that our students are always asking the why. And that's the first step in being a critical thinker and not just accepting. I just did a literacy event and I gave some of the students a speech about why they should want to read. And there were two reasons, because you should want to know the truth and you should want to know more. And when you have that narrative constantly around you all the time, then it becomes a habit. And I think that that's one of the things I would tell our students is explore your history. What do you, as a parent, what do you see that your children like to do? Do they like dirt? Do they like water? Do they like mixing things? Do they like to talk? There is a Black historian that is in every one of these things that they like to do. And so find that or tell them to find it. And then that will begin the journey of that inquiry. And I think that's where it starts.
Yeah. Interesting. I like it. So let me get us out of the rabbit hole.
Okay.
How did you go, or how did you go from chemical engineering technology to remedial ed, and then ultimately focusing on our Black children in urban settings?
So I'm a product, I graduated in 1990. I'm a little dated. And I went into chemistry because my mom told me to. I'm going to just be honest with you. Back then, we listened to our parents, and it was a new field for women, and Black women were almost unheard of in the 80s to be going into science. And so my mom said, she worked at the University of Cincinnati, and she said, hey, go into this field. They're looking for women and they don't have any Black women. And I thought, oh my God, it was just something that I was good at. It wasn't anything that I loved. I don't have a passion for chemistry. It was just something that came pretty easy. And I thought, okay, well, I can make a lot of money, which is what my mom said. And that's exactly what I did. I graduated with a 2-year degree and I made quite a bit of money working for a local gas and electric company as a chemist. People don't realize that making electricity is chemistry, primarily chemistry. And so I just didn't like that. I just did not like that at all. It was something that I was good at, but it wasn't something that I was driven to do. And so went back, life happened, got married, went back, got my bachelor's degree, but because I had a lot of chemistry classes, I was pigeonholed into science. So that's how I got the bachelor's in natural sciences with a focus in chemistry, because I had worked in that field and had all those chemistry courses. And then I worked for the University of Cincinnati as an academic advisor. And I saw in this particular program, a lot of students are needing remedial courses at the collegiate level. Mm-hmm. Why? That means that there's some, and they were white, Black, but they were primarily African American. And I thought, this is crazy. What are our schools doing or not doing that is creating a narrative that these students need remediation? And it wasn't that they had low GPAs. So it wasn't always the students that had a 1.7. It was the students with a 3.1, but they didn't have enough to get into their baccalaureate college, whether that be business or arts and sciences. And it just seemed to be a conundrum that was amazing to me. So I got a master's degree in remediation in higher ed because I was seeing that every single day, and it just didn't make sense. And that led me down the pathway that our schools are, our public schools and our private schools, but our schools are not educating efficiently enough. I'm going to say that nicely. And so did a little bit more research, and then I really just have a passion for figuring out what's going on in our urban schools. Our urban schools are primarily populated by Black and brown students that look like me. And so it was to do a dissertation on what does it take to effectively educate urban African American students? And it's about relationship building. I interviewed as an action research oral history methodology. I interviewed white teachers, black teachers, old, young, retired, women, men, and it was all of the ones that were deemed successful did so by building a relationship with students. And so that was the kicker. And it just makes sense. And that taught me how to be a really good teacher. It's about the relationship. And I've had students who have cut up in other classes and not cut up in my class, and
Mhm.
they will tell me, because I like you.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like,
I've had
wow.
that same experience. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
So, and that old mantra that kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, it really
Hmm.
is the truth. And I think it's also true for adults because I taught on the collegiate level. Adults are the same way. I can get a student to earn an A in my class by making sure that they know I'm here for you and that I care about this grade and you should care. And I tell them I match your flow. So if you give me 100%, I'm giving you 100%. If you don't care about your grade, I'm going to report what you earn. And so I just, that team has been consistent. I think that's how I got here.
Yeah, that is awesome. Yeah, it's interesting the way, I won't say life throws us a curve, but life shows us a path. And when we venture down the one where our passion is, that it's a whole lot easier, a lot more fun, um, and create some life enjoyment and fulfillment out of the work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I have found as well. I want to ask you a question that I'm asking all of my educator guests. It's the topic that I was presenting on at OSBA when we met, and that's this whole controversy over racial representation in the classroom. Let's talk specifically about Black and Brown children having teachers that look like them. So, how do you see representation, particularly ethnic or racial representation, playing a role in student achievement and student discipline in your community schools?
That's a great question. It's very heavy and I love it because I think I have two thoughts, two veins of thought. One, I have experienced being a Black educator and having my cultural awareness resonate with my students. I've also seen where some of my colleagues who were not African American were able to move the needle with students as well,
Mhm.
differently, but still be able to move the needle. So I think having educators in the classroom is super significant. I don't know if it has to be 100% because to be completely honest with you, I've known some Black educators that weren't very good educators. And the same for white educators as well. So I have seen it both ways, but I will say I think it makes a difference when students see themselves or someone that has their experiences in whatever they do, particularly education, particularly in DEI work. I just think in books, in the curriculum, there are ways that they need to see themselves that our parents didn't have to do, didn't have to supplement. So I'll give you an example. So my mom, I went to a predominantly white all girls school, and there were no Black teachers, none.
Mhm.
But my mom worked at UC, so whenever we were discussing a book and they tried to be culturally relevant, my mom would get a UC professor to also help me understand the book from a UC professor within African American studies. So I was asking different questions. Our
Mhm.
parents, my generation, we supplemented a lot because we wanted you to have the experience. We knew that there were going to be some deficits. I think parents nowadays trust way too much and they don't supplement as has been done. And so our students are getting just set of one set of ways to do things. And I think if this had been back in the 80s and 90s, parents would be supplementing, so it would be okay. But now it's not, and so we have to be intentionally making certain that our students are getting cross cultural experiences, and that includes having people in the building who are not just custodial staff, who are
Thank
not
you.
just support staff. They are actually in the classroom making decisions. And I've even noticed sometimes grading is different because, I tell students, I report what you earn. I don't
Mhm.
give grades. I report what you earned. You earned an A. You earned a D. That's a whole different word speak than some teachers. And I think that part is cultural. And as long as you have an environment where white teachers are learning from black teachers, I think the environment sets the tone as well. It's not just about the color, but it's also about the intent. Why did you go into teaching?
Yeah,
Some
absolutely.
people go into teaching because they really want to make a difference, regardless of the color. They are in it to make a difference, and they're making certain that students are getting what they need. They're getting fed that education in totality. But again, I've known some black teachers that have not done that. Now, within education, and I said this was a weighty topic because I have a different opinion about DEI work. So I think education you could have. I prefer to make sure that it's culturally relevant and that it's culturally inclusive. But in DEI work, I have a slight disconnect when we don't hire people of color to talk about their experiences. So I'm biased because I have seen the best, well intended non people of color who are in DEI making a lot of money
Oh
about
yeah.
experiences that they don't own. And that bothers me. That bothers me. So in the classroom, I think it's definitely relevant with regard to DEI work in corporate or in schools. I just think that you can find people to, and if you can't, because I did have one school come to me because they did demonstrate where they showed it, then you have to really be intentional. That person has to be very, very open to understanding at number one, I don't know personally, no matter what type of empathy
Yeah.
that I teach, I don't know. I am not the expert. And the best DEI professionals that were non-people of color are the ones that brought people in because they recognized that they were not the experts, but I have access to them or I will find them with intentionality. And so I'm a little conflicted I'm not conflicted. I don't believe that I'm not conflicted at all. I'm going to tell you right now. I believe in the education space. There are tons of professional educators of color that may not have chosen the traditional path for a multitude of reasons, primarily because they weren't steered that way in schools of education, but also um, we can do better with the education space, and we need to do better with the DEI space as
Yeah.
well.
I'm going to keep them separate. I'm going to stay in education for just a second. I definitely want to go back to the DEI thing. I think one of the things that we can do in education, especially because educators tend to be, and I'm going to use the word educator as opposed to teacher, because we're talking about two different things. But educators tend to be lifelong learners, and educators tend to be interested in continuing to understand so that they can lead their children, so they can educate the children that they have. So you can work on developing cultural competency and cultural awareness with people who are educators, not necessarily people who are teachers. Those people got in to get a job and to just literally lay down whatever it is that the district tells them they're supposed to do. But educators are interested in understanding and doing the best they can for their children. So I think they're much more open to becoming culturally aware and culturally competent. I believe also that those are the people who can say, I've not had that experience, but I understand your experience is unique, your lived experience is different from mine, and I respect that. And I can't answer or fix for you, but I can find someone who you can talk to, someone who does have that experience for you to connect to. And I think that finding those people in the DEI space, which has become, I'm just going to say, polluted with people who are there to, I don't want to use the word grift, but make a living. Yeah. Yeah. To make a living because it is the thing to do right now, right? It's the hot word right now, that when they don't have the ability to say, it hasn't been my experience, and I know I cannot possibly understand what you are feeling. So let me find the person who can, right? I can present about, but I can't present from that same experience or that same perspective. I can't possibly, no, I can, but what does she call them? Melanicious person, people without melanin, melanicious person, cannot have the same experience with certain words that are lobbed at those of us who are Black, right? They can't have that experience of what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that because they don't have 400 years of trauma that's been carried in our bodies from generation to generation. So they may not feel the same impact from certain conversations that are had in that space.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I'm with you 100%.
Yeah.
And therefore I do think it's systemic because we put some people who are melanicious, I like that. They are sometimes put in positions as a checkbox because we need to have we need to have a person in that position rather than authentically we want to grow. That's a whole different issue as well.
You know what I call that, and I did an episode on it. I call that the bullshit of performative equity.
I love it.
We're saying we're doing it. Look, we have a person. But if that person does not have any power to affect change in that organization, they literally they're a token.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And they're a willing token because they pay a lot of money for these positions too. And sometimes I've been in positions where I had power to hire, to fire, to make contracts and to bring change. But the pushback wasn't from administration. It was from the clients. It was from the customers. It was from the people who didn't want that change. Yeah. So regardless of what the strategic plan said, they did not want it. And the pushback was where, okay, we pay tuition to you. So you're going to, and administration wanted to do it, but it was kind of like, well, we can't. So I get it. Get it.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the quote? Power concedes nothing without a demand. Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about recruiting and retaining teachers of color. I know a lot of districts want to do that in our current environment where there's a lack of teachers overall. And I've been doing a little bit of research and work on that. But how do you see in your area, especially districts going about recruiting teachers of color and initiatives to retain them once they've got them or challenges with retention?
I think I have a different position because I am a board member. So but I've also been that alternative licensure person who didn't go into education. So I have the vantage point of being able to see it from where a lot of our professionals who are professionals of color want to go into teaching, but the system's not easy for them. If you did not go into a school of education and have an education licensure, credential, anything, then it is very difficult for you to gain entrance into that vein of profession. And I say that because even a sub position is difficult when you're talking about alternative credentialing that you have to get in the state of Ohio. So I come from a different perspective in that I think we need to do things differently in order to get a different result. I think that districts need to be intentional. And I don't say anything is exclusive. So I don't say, when I say intentionally recruit, I'm not saying don't recruit from schools of education. I'm saying concurrently. That is one pathway, a school of education. But if the minority students aren't there,
right,
and if they're historically not being told to go into education, then you're not going to get a large pool. And so to me, that seems like a lesson of futility. So I think we need to start talking to our students. Again, these things are concurrent. We need to start talking to our students about going into education starting sophomore, junior year, because that's where it starts. It starts in the high school. So we need to create a pipeline. And even with creating a pipeline, because we have done this in Cincinnati, even with creating a pipeline, we're not getting large numbers at all. We're trickling. And so to me, again, that's not going to be a fruitful, it's going to be a measure, but not a fruitful one. I think the biggest gain is in those people who were like myself. We didn't go into education as an initial profession. We've got a multitude of work skill and degrees, but we need the alternative licensure pathway. That pathway, I believe, is intentionally difficult for people, again, systemically,
Mhm.
because that's where primarily a lot of people who are great people of color, but don't go into education initially. I think it's intentionally difficult. And I know that it's intentionally difficult because I've lived it. So the credentialing piece, you have to turn your transcripts in and then they determine what you can teach. If you were like me, you went into chemistry, not because you liked it, but because you were good at that. Now you're stuck in teaching science. Or if you maybe you retired from one of these companies and you've got 30 years experience, someone tells you what you can teach. That may or may not be your passion, but
Right.
that you're being told that. And then you have to get an alternative licensure. And the alternative licensure process in the state of Ohio is not easy. It's not fast. And it can be discouraging. There's a piece from the district and then there's a portion from the state. None of it is easy. None of it takes just a minute. So it's not something that you could think, well, I want to do this. I think I want to do this starting in January and it'd be November. You're not going to get it approved that fast. So I think it is intentionally discouraging. And what we need to do is to create a pathway for alternative licensure for people of color to get education certified so that they can get in these classrooms. Because I think we have a large group of people. And I know I've been reached by at least three of my friends. One of them is retiring from the financial market.
Mhm.
He was a financial analyst for one of the largest firms here in the state of Ohio, and he's retiring, not 55. And he's like, I really want to go into teaching. He's been a coach for my kids, really a good guy, but it has taken him almost a year to get through this process. That is ridiculous. Now, he has the tenacity and the drive, and he said, I'm retired. But Kareem, if this is the process for me and I want to do it, what if you kind of don't know if you want to do it? Now you're discouraged.
Right.
Again, I think we need to think out the box to get different results. And I think alternative licensure, recreating that to be a process that is simpler, will get us fruitful results.
Okay. So I didn't talk about that in the intro, but you just mentioned that you are a school board member. And so, from a political perspective, do you see something like that, alternative licensure process for people of color at the state level? Do you see that having any traction, not just in Ohio, but in any state? Is that something that you think, given our current political climate, that that's something that can happen?
That's a great question. I can speak specifically on Ohio. I think it will be very difficult in Ohio. And I'll be very honest with you. I think it may be a challenge for states that are very, very welcoming of charter schools. Um, I don't know if, to be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know about the nation, but I can say Ohio is not really getting a large amount of traction on charters. And so I think that the alternative licensure movement is difficult in part for that reason.
Okay.
Again, I'm not exactly certain for other states because I couldn't tell you which states are, I can tell you a few, but I couldn't tell you definitively which states are really, really pro charter and then correlate that with their alternative licensure
Right.
piece. But I do think the state of Ohio, the Ohio Department of Education, which is where our licensure for alternative licensure has to come from, it's not an easy process. Again, we are also, they're wanting to push charters here, but it's not picking up as much as I think it had intended or they would like for it to. So I think that there is some correlation there.
Okay. Interesting. It's something I'm going to have to dig into.
Yeah.
For next season, I'm focusing solely on the politics of education. So I'll have to have you back and we'll talk about politics a little bit more. Um, I want to ask you, as educators, especially when we've worked in the classroom, we always have stories about our kids that stick with us. As soon as I start to ask that question, I'm always smiling because there are three or four of my formers that pop into my head, and I've had the opportunity and the privilege to be able to write about those stories in my books. I always tell stories about kids, or when I'm doing a session, there's always a child story that pops into my head. What is the one student story that sticks with you that you'd like to share with us?
I have quite a few, but I'm going to pick the one that is probably the most relevant for this time. I had a student who was trans, and that's an area that I'm not the most familiar with, but I'm learning. And so the student, I did not know at the time, but the student had tried to get their name changed with the university, and the university was not doing that. They would only go by the birth name. So they didn't tell the staff. So I'm calling attendance for a few classes, and the student would come up to me afterwards and say, this person was here. And I thought, okay, I started to make some connections like, you've been sitting there all this time. Why didn't you tell me? So about maybe the third or fourth time, I asked and I said, can you tell me why you don't come up, why you don't answer? And she was able to tell me why. And she shared that she was going by a different name that was on the paper. I said, okay, well, I'll call you that name. And so once I did that, called her the name, she answered every time. And she came to me and she said that the university wouldn't do this and, some things that they wouldn't do. And I went back to my colleagues and the dean and I said, I really think this is unfair. This is starting to mess with this particular student's social and emotional learning. Is there anything that we can do? And helped this student advocate for getting policies changed in the university for our trans students who were transitioning with their name. And that it just was something that I did. It was nothing that I was looking for any particular result. And that student ended up graduating my class. I mean, not finishing that class with an A, but she came back at graduation and she was going to graduate, I think, within 1 or 2 semesters. And she shared that she was in part so happy to have finished her experience in a positive because I helped her get that done. And again, it was something that I was doing. And she said, "You're fierce." That's how because Sasha Fierce was out. She goes, "You're fierce." She's like, "You're bad." I love it. And then that was the first time I heard the fierce piece. And then I had been described as a fierce advocate, as you shared. And I thought, I'm going to claim that because it's something that I'm doing, but I'm helping students. And I'm admitting that I don't understand. I'm admitting that I need to grow if you can teach me because you are the expert on this and on you. But I want to advocate for you. And it made a difference in her life. And it just reminds me of that I think the little boy walking on the beach and he's like throwing the turtles back. He's like, it made a difference to that one. And it made a difference to her. And so that is probably the most impactful story that I have because I wasn't trying to do anything other than just be me. And it made a huge difference for her. So,
and I think there's a huge lesson in there for so many people. I call my listeners equity warriors, and we're all learning to do better, to do more. But in being able to say, help me understand. Now, I also say there's a fine line there because every white person can't go to a person of color and say, help me understand. Yeah. We can only do so much. And there are so many resources out there now for listeners who are white. Obviously, if they're listening, they're learning, right? So here's one resource, pass it on. But just to be open to asking, I want to help you with this, especially when we're talking about our kids that are struggling, our kids that are marginalized, who may not have places to go. So as if you didn't have enough to do, educator, board member, mom, all those other things. You have a nonprofit. So tell us about your nonprofit.
Oh, that's the part that I get excited about. So you spoke about being able to do something that you absolutely love. And so I have figured out that I love hanging with young people and figuring out what's going on and how to make it better for them. And so I started a nonprofit called Youth Lead Alliance. And we started in October of 2019. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. But what we did was we heard young people say, there's nothing to do in our city. But we were able to come across dozens of organizations that were doing things. And so we created, in 2019, we created this master calendar of events. And we put it on a website for organizations to put their events in one place for kids, young people, to be able to find out what's to do in the city. The pandemic happened, And we had been holding think tanks for kids across the city over food, and we were really, really growing and gaining momentum. And the pandemic did a bunch of things, but it stopped our momentum at that time because kids didn't want to meet online. They were a little tired. And so we rebirthed last year, and we now have three divisions. So Youth Lead Alliance has our portal, which is what we had always started with, which is at hearusnowyouth.org. And organizations can come together to organizations that serve youth can come together. We convene them, and they can post their events on this calendar for young people to actually see what's going on. It does have a social media feel, so young people can actually create a profile and engage with each other. But the good thing is, whether you serve, we service organizations that serve young people indirectly or directly. So if you are a Lighthouse or a Talbert House, I don't know if they have those across the nation, but those are direct service providers to young people. But if you are an indirect service provider, like Women Helping Women, where you do domestic violence classes, we want all organizations to be at the same space to share events. And then we also have a database where we are allowing organizations to come together and see what young people or what services young people are getting across our city so that we can reduce duplication of services and they can be more efficient. They can also collaborate on programming. So I'm super excited. The website, I'm going to just plug it. It's youthleadalliance.org. And we convene youth serving organizations across the city. And we are expanding to just do Cincinnati. But this is to magnify youth voices. And we are working hard for systemic changes in the city.
Okay, so that was youthleadalliance.org.
Yes.
Okay. And we'll make sure that there's a link down in the show notes so people can click on that and go straight to it.
Thank you.
All righty. So, I always sign off with a paraphrase of, I would say, one of my sheroes, the great Dr. Angela Davis. And she said, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. So what is the thing you cannot accept? And what can my listeners do to support that change in their own communities?
Wow, that's a good one. One of the things that I cannot accept is the discomfort that is felt by young Black and Brown youth that don't hear enough that they are enough, that they can do and be whatever they want. So when I meet people, and I would challenge people to do the same, I immediately see a beautiful woman and I say, hello, beautiful. Hello, handsome. Good morning. I can give you great energy. I can meet you and start your day or our interaction in a positive. That's something simple to do. And it makes a difference. And I'll tell you why I do this now is because I was waiting for an ice cream truck and I was she was 8 years old. And we were standing there together and I said, hello, beautiful. And she says, hello, beautiful to you. And this little girl told me, she said, I needed that.
Oh,
little girl told me that. And I said, really, I needed that too. And she says, I think you're beautiful. And it just gave me the courage that we don't know what people are going through, but I can start my interaction with you in a positive. I can choose that. Even if I'm not feeling good, I can give you something positive. So that's what I'm changing is the narrative that if we're having a crunchy day or if something's not going right, we don't have to stay there. We can actually give some good energy to other people. And so I want to make sure that young people especially hear that I think they're enough, even in the 30-second interaction.
So that's something that everyone absolutely could do starting as soon as you finish listening to this podcast or watching, depending on how you're receiving this, is just to greet someone with warmth and receptivity and love and say hello. Yeah. Hello, beautiful. Hello, wonderful. Hello, just, hello with a smile on your face. Oh, yeah. I like that. That's something we can all take away. All right. Just a reminder, folks, if you are hearing this for the first time on an audio podcast, these are special episodes that feature everyday equity warriors doing amazing things. And so they will always be published as videos first on my YouTube channel about a week or two, at least two, ahead of the audio release. So if you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, look down in the show notes for that link. I am at Almitra Berry on YouTube. Subscribe, turn on notifications so you get the sneak peek when the next interview is posted. And of course, share and spread the word. My guest today has been Dr. Kareem Moncree-Moffett, a fierce disruptor of inequity. Again, we will put her contact information down in the show notes. Doc, sis, thank you for joining me. We will do this again. Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
And to you equity warriors out there, if you or someone you know is an everyday equity warrior doing amazing things, let me know. We have wonderful guests coming up, and maybe you or someone you know should be one of them. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and as always, don't worry about the things you cannot change. Change the things you can no longer accept. And I'll see you next time.